Just about 6 months ago now, our new bishop assembled the priests of the diocese for a big meeting so he could introduce himself to us and we could get to know him a little bit and vice versa. He asked us 2 questions. What are you hoping for? What are you worried about? As we went around the room, there were guys who said different things. There were many who mentioned, well, we're concerned about the workload on the young priests in particular, that they won't get to do what they became priests to do. The international priests said, we're worried about our immigration status. Some mentioned, we hope that you will continue what we have done here in Albany with promoting lay leadership. You know, the strongest parishes, they're the ones with the strongest lay leaders, and so on and so on. I confess that none of us mentioned, and I didn't even think, in the approximately 200 years of history of our diocese, I don't think we've ever raised anyone from the dead. I'm sure that people have been cured, but there's no documented case of a miraculous healing. At this time of transition, as I am now standing before you for the very last time as your pastor anyway, and as Father Russ is coming, no doubt there are many things in your minds and in your hearts, things you hope he will do, gifts you hope he will bring, things you hope he will understand. And I'm sure you have some worries. Will he change the Mass schedule? Will he be friendly? Will he work with us? But when we read the Scriptures, if we really take to heart what the mission was that Jesus sent his disciples out to do, we must acknowledge that there is so often a disconnect between why the church actually exists and what our expectations are on the day-to-day. The mission that we have, the mission in which we share, it is amazing. It involves things like miracles, curing the sick, raising the dead, preaching the good news to the poor, turning people's lives around, liberating them from the power of the devil himself. And so often, we fixate on comparatively small things. Now, it's not that the small things don't matter at all. Day-to-day life is made up mostly of small things. How we work with one another in the small things, how we treat each other in the midst of the minutiae of life, that does so much for how we form bonds with each other, how we build trust with each other, how we learn and how we grow. It has its place, don't get me wrong. But what we really ought to be looking for are those signs that we are participating in the same mission that Jesus gave the church 2,000 years ago. If we would claim to be the same church, then we have to be about the same mission. And so when Father Russ is here next month, he will have a responsibility for overseeing the finances. He'll have to be involved in some degree as to why the organ's not working today and all of those little things. But will you look to him for the big things? Will you trust that God has sent him to you Yes, even to cure you when you are sick. And therefore, when you get the cancer diagnosis, will you call him and ask to be anointed? Then, before the chemo, before the radiation, yes, to pray for healing, but also so that your sufferings might be united to the redeeming power of Christ as you go through that process? Or will you do as sadly is so often the case, only after everything else has failed and hospice has been called, and you've had that first injection of morphine and are asleep? Will you then allow the priest to come? Because otherwise it's too scary. Will you look to him to raise you from the dead? Now, admittedly, in the church's history, the number of times it is documented that a corpse has been revivified and a person who was dead and had ceased all biological function gets up and starts walking and talking again is very, very rare. But just as there is more than one way to die, there is more than one way to be dead. Will you look to him to preach the words of life to you? Will you bring him people to be baptized so that he might help them die to sin and then raise them up to new life in Christ? Will you ask him to come and bless your homes? Will you invite him into the struggles that you have when you know you are being assailed by our enemy? And above all, will you trust that no matter what, you are in the hands of God? And look that at least on occasion, you will experience God's love and God's care through his hands. And of course, not just his, but whoever will come after him, whoever else God may send here to this community. Above all, we always are called to trust, called to have faith that we will receive what we need the most in the long run. Yes, there is struggle. Yes, there is disappointment. Yes, we have to put up with weakness and sometimes even failure. But none of that changes the fact that God has chosen us. He has chosen his church to be an instrument of how he will cure the ills of this world, how he will expel the powers of death and darkness from humanity's midst, and bring alienated, wounded, suffering humanity close to his heart, and eventually into his eternal embrace of love and life. In other words, dream big. Don't stop at things like the roof or the parking lot or numbers in faith formation. As important as all of those things are, look for the signs that God is doing something that only God could do. Expect to see proof unfolding in your very midst that God himself is present and active every single day, choosing you over and over and over to be his beloved sons and daughters and his ambassadors of love to the rest of the world. Look to see what missionaries will be sent forth from this community. Look to see what miracles might happen, because that indeed is the mission. And God has chosen us for it. Peace be with all of you this day, and with all who love the Lord in simplicity of heart.